Excellent. Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got some amazing content to cover tonight. So welcome to the College Prep Workshop Series. Tanya, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yes, hello everyone. This is the last workshop of our series. So great job in tuning in for all of them. If there's one, or maybe this is the first time that you're joining, you're able to watch the past three. So we did the college essay workshop, how to stand out in your application, how to strategize your scholarship hunt. And then today we're going to cover how to pay for college, how to make it more affordable. So again, all of these will be on YouTube on a playlist, so you can go back and take notes and rewatch as many times as you'd like. So now I'll hand it over to Griffin, who's our expert here. So Griffin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Alrighty, so hello again, everyone. So my name is Griffin Chalice. I'm one of our undergraduate financial aid counselors in the financial aid office at Pacific University. So work primarily with students and their families, just throughout the process of figuring out how to pay for college, right? It's a big factor for folks and something that I know can be super overwhelming, right? So I think I always really like to preface these conversations by just saying it's okay to be overwhelmed, right? There are going to be moments that it's going to feel like a lot, and that's completely normal, right? And that's just a part of really the entire application process for college, right? But it's just understanding that there are people, departments, folks on campuses everywhere that are there for you as resources, right? I always tell people, like, my sole job, right? My sole role is just to be there as a resource for you all in navigating the process of financial aid and paying for college. And really that's true and applicable when you're interested in Pacific University. It's true if you're a student at Pacific University, but it even extends beyond that, right? Like if this fall you're looking at other schools, looking at places outside Pacific, and you need help with your FAFSA or just have a general question regarding financial aid, I'm going to get you all my contact info later on in this presentation. And I mean, reach out, right? I'm always more than happy to answer an email, hop on the phone, and just make sure that any questions you have or anything that's not clear can be answered. So just kind of a general overview of tonight. I want to go through this presentation, and then I know there's going to be a Q&A session here at the end where y'all can ask some questions and get some answers. If there's any questions during the presentation, throw them in chat. I'll try to be aware and be alert and see if anything comes through. I think there's a small enough group here to where I can hopefully grab anything that comes through in chat. And Maddie and Tanya, if something comes through and I miss it, feel free to interrupt me, and we can get onto that and answer that question there as well. So going through kind of what I'm going to talk about, I want to chat about just the overview of the financial aid process, right? So this is a process that kind of happens throughout the year and really kind of coincides with any sort of admissions process and everything that happens kind of periodically. And it's going to occur really right, from now all the way through to when you start wherever you decide to attend school next fall, right? I'm going to talk about the types and different resources for financial aid, the application process, so applying for financial aid, whether that be through the FAFSA, which we're going to talk about, or different scholarship resources and things like that. I want to talk about how financial aid decisions are made, whether that be at the federal level, institutional level, and just talk about kind of the processes and factors and components at play there that come into decision making in financial aid offices. I want to cover financial aid packages and paying for college, and then talk about a little bit of some additional news and some important resources moving forward as well. And look, I already caught something in the chat, and it's Maddie. Okay, I will continue. So starting this off here, really just want people to start thinking about financial aid, right? Like I was mentioning, financing college is a part of the process, right? And it's something that definitely is a factor, right? I always tell people it's really important to not think of it as the factor, right? Because schools have a lot of different resources. There are a lot of different departments that want to make sure that you're there, and there are a lot of different scholarship opportunities to take advantage of. So definitely, don't want it to be a barrier, but want people to understand that it is an important part of the process, and something to keep in mind. So first thing are deadlines, right? So as is anything when involved with the process of applying, there are going to be deadlines related to financial aid, whether those are with admissions, deadlines related to the FAFSA, and then also different institutional scholarship deadlines, right? So at Pacific, we have a whole bunch of scholarship opportunities for incoming students, and they do in fact have a deadline, right? So their deadline is March 1st of next year. So just know, if you're looking at applying for scholarships through institutions and even scholarships that exist outside of the university ecosystem, you're keeping in mind that there are deadlines for those, right? And you're putting them on your calendars, writing all that stuff down, keep spreadsheets of deadlines, right? I think that's really helpful. I am guilty of forgetting things, so I always make sure I put a note in my calendar or a note in my phone if there's ever a deadline that I need to keep in mind as well. Another component I think that's really important for people to think about and consider is the level of parental involvement, right? So for folks who have parents or guardians who are going to be part of this process, right, for not only applying for school, but also in relation to financial aid, I think, start thinking about the level of involvement that you expect, right? The level of involvement that you would like, whether that be from parents, guardians, older siblings, right? Are you going to be getting support from folks? Or, if not, think about definitely reaching out to folks on campuses, right? Financial aid officers, your admissions counselors, and things like that, and just know that there are resources for you in relation to involvement throughout the process, right? Next is level of parental contribution financially to paying for college, right? And this is not something that everyone has, right? Not a resource that everyone can pull from. So I think definitely, if your parents or guardians are going to be contributing to your education, it's definitely super important to start those conversations about the level that's going to be at early, just so you know in relation to when you start communicating with me and with our office what your situation is, right? And what your financial situation is and what you're expecting both from us as well as from your family, guardians, and folks like that. So really, really, really always encourage folks to just get on it early, start thinking about deadlines and things like that, and just know that there's a process that's going to have to take place for financial aid. More things to really discuss and start discussing early is a big one, a huge one, is loan indebtedness, right? So this is a reality for a bunch of folks. There are folks who go through the entirety of college without borrowing. There are folks who borrow each year. So really important to start thinking about not only who's going to be borrowing, right? Whether that be student, parent, but then also how much folks are borrowing, right? With the understanding that you are not going to school just for 1 year, right? So you're planning for 4 years, and that's a bullet point around it, right? So beyond your freshman year, you're planning for a minimum of 4 years of college, right? You want to leave with a degree. The goal for us at Pacific and really any financial aid office is to have you leave in better circumstances than when you came, right? So just start thinking about those expectations and start thinking about kind of those different components that will go into the financial aid process as you're continuing throughout the year. Touching about different types and resources of financial aid. So just like, what the lingo is surrounding financial aid, and when you hear certain things, what that means and where those resources are coming from. So really, I think it's helpful to break this down into 4 different types, right? So these are grants, scholarships, loans, and work, right? And so when we talk about grants, those exist at the federal level, state level, institutional level. So at Pacific, we have grants that are for students that are specifically from Pacific. And then we also have students who receive what's called a federal Pell Grant. There are some Oregon residents at Pacific who receive grants from the state of Oregon. So grants that pull in from a whole bunch of different resources. Next, scholarships. So whether those be institutional scholarships, so at Pacific, we offer a ton of scholarships for incoming students that I'll chat a little bit more about later on. And then also whether those be scholarships from outside resources, right? So whether those are outside organizations, outside employers, scholarships are a great way to really fund college. And right, when we think about financial aid, scholarships and grants, money you don't have to pay back, right? It's awesome stuff. Scholarships and grants are always going to be the best place to start in relation to financial aid. And then moving on, talking about loans, right? So whether those are federal loans through the federal government that students or parents can take out, or student loans through what are called private lenders, which are private companies that end up lending to students throughout the year. Next is work opportunities. And with this one, you're going to hear me mention a couple times in this presentation something called federal work study. And so federal work study can be kind of I think, a mystifying aspect of financial aid for some folks. And really the best way that I always break it down and like to explain it to folks is that work study is essentially a federally funded jobs program for students. So at Pacific University, we receive a certain amount of funds from the federal government for the year for students to work in what are called federal work study positions. And so on campus at Pacific, we have a whole bunch of different departments that want to hire students and have students work for them and gain experience with their departments and build these awesome personal and professional connections. And so students who are eligible for federal work study can earn money through that federal work study job. And that money goes directly to the student, right? So students who get federal work study jobs on campus would set up direct deposit with our HR department and then get paid that money directly to them, right? So federal work study might be a component of your financial aid package that you end up getting, but it's going to be funds that you'll need to earn through a federal work study position that will come directly to you, essentially. So really, when we talk about financial aid, these are going to be kind of the main sources that we're pulling from, and just, you know, language and words to keep in mind as you're communicating with financial aid offices and thinking about financial aid moving forward. So talking about scholarships, something you're going to hear a lot is what we call merit-based aid. And so when we talk about merit aid in relation to scholarships, these are scholarships that are based upon recognition of you, right? Recognition of who you are as a student and as a person, right? So there are merit-based scholarships that extend beyond, you know, just having a 4.0. There's scholarships that are ranging with involvement in things. So for example, at Pacific, we have what we call our talent awards. And so with these, students partner with our different departments and can get awards and scholarships for things like music, creative writing, dance, computer science, and a whole bunch of different things like that. So really these, when we talk about merit-based aid, it's things that are in recognition of things that you have done, right? And when we talk about merit-based aid, just in general for schools, applicants can sometimes compete against one another and be compared against one another in relation to merit-based aid. One thing I always like to highlight when chatting with folks about Pacific's financial aid is that is not the case for our merit-based scholarships at Pacific University, right? So your merit-based scholarships at Pacific you're not going to be competing with other students, right? It's going to be based on you. And if someone else gets the scholarship, the same scholarship that you're eligible for, there's no chance of you missing out on that scholarship as well, right? Another thing to keep in mind when looking at financial aid is that some merit-based scholarships may or may not be renewable. So that merit-based aid at Pacific that I was mentioning, those scholarships are renewable for 4 years. All 4 years you're a student at Pacific University. And some schools that differs, right? So just another thing to keep in mind when you're working with financial aid offices and working with different schools is making sure you know what aid and what scholarships are renewable and which are not, right? And again, not every school has merit-based aid. Some schools don't offer merit-based scholarships. Some schools go only based on need. So it really can differ from institution to institution. But again, just making sure you know what types of opportunities for merit-based aid are available where you're applying and some things to look out for in that regard too. When we talk about need-based aid, we're talking about, oh, we got a question that come through. Woo! Okay, so the question is, will Pacific University consider my senior year fall and spring transcripts with merit-based scholarships, especially if my GPA improves from what it is now? Maddie or Tanya, I think, do one of our admissions counselors wanna take this one?
Typically, when a student applies, it's in the beginning of their senior year. It's right now, it's the fall. We'd love to see, you know, students applying before November 1st, which is our first deadline. So typically students don't have senior year grades yet. You can report which classes you're taking in your Common App. You'll report your senior year grades or your senior year schedule. So we really actually don't end up seeing those grades. Now, if you did decide to apply by our second deadline, our early action 2 deadline in January, it's likely that we could see those senior year transcripts. But the majority of students apply with us seeing up until junior year.
Perfect. Thank you, Maddie. And yeah, again, if there has been a huge change, right, in your situation from year to year, that's definitely something you can reach out to financial aid offices and specific about, so we can kind of take a look at it. But again, originally, since due to the application cycle going to be based off not those years' grades. So okay, talking a little bit more about federal student aid programs, right? So these are types of financial aid that's going to be available through what we call the FAFSA, right? So that's the free application for federal student aid. You've probably heard of it, and if you haven't, it's going to be the application that folks will do to be considered for eligibility for federal student aid programs, right? And so when we talk about federal student aid programs, you've heard me mention the federal Pell Grant. There's what's called the federal SEOD grant. There's our Iraq-Afghanistan Service Award. There's what's called the Teach Grant, which is a grant that students can get if they're going to be teaching past their undergrad experience. Again, federal work study, which I just explained to y'all a little bit prior, and then also federal direct loans. So when we think about federal direct loans, these are split into 2 different types, right? So there's what's called the federal direct subsidized loan and the federal direct unsubsidized loan. And so the difference with these 2 is that the federal direct subsidized loan does not accrue interest while you are enrolled in school, right? So while you're enrolled as a student, the federal government pays all of the interest that accrues on the subsidized loan. And that exists in contrast to the unsubsidized loan, where that loan will begin to accrue interest the moment that it's dispersed for school, right? With both of these federal direct loans, however, students do not enter any sort of repayment until 6 months after they graduate or are no longer enrolled at an institution of higher education. And then you've heard me mention also the distinction between student borrowing versus parent borrowing. So at the federal level, there's what's called the Federal Direct Parent Plus Loan. And so this is a loan that the parents of dependent undergraduate students can borrow up to whatever a student's remaining cost of attendance is. And we'll talk a little bit about what cost of attendance means later on. So these are just all the different federal student aid programs that are super important to be familiar with. Again, you know, this is super in-depth info is available on studentaid.gov. I don't know if I would advise diving super deep into that at this point. It's not super interesting stuff. But if you're curious, you're always welcome to go on and make sure, you know, hopefully you've thought about doing the FAFSA yet. It's open as of October 1st. So if you're planning on doing the FAFSA, definitely go to studentaid.gov, get that in as soon as possible, and feel free to poke around in the site and learn more about these resources as well. One thing I want to show folks that I think is at least to me pretty interesting is just kind of a breakdown of where undergraduate students are getting financial aid from. And this is for the 2020-21 academic year, which is the most recent year that we have this data available from. Right, and so the super important takeaway is that the majority of this is from institutional grants and scholarships, right? So there's a ton of money out there that students and schools want to give to you, right? They want you to show off those skills that I've mentioned. They want to give you merit-based aid for all of your accomplishments. So, you know, definitely a super awesome thing to see. Something that's pretty interesting is federal student loans used to be the largest bulk of where financial aid went to for students, right? And this is kind of shifted in the past couple of years to where we're seeing higher numbers of institutional grants and scholarships as well. And so again, there's a couple other things on here, a good amount, 15% coming from federal Pell Grants, 7% from private grants and state grants as well. So I think just a helpful visual to kind of break down where these funds are coming from, right? And what the majority of funds that students are receiving is coming from as well. Talking a little bit about the application process for financial aid with the FAFSA, right? So when doing the FAFSA, you have two ways to file it, right? The first and most popular way is going to be fafsa.gov, so doing the online FAFSA form. And the other is going to be a paper FAFSA, which folks can still fill out. We don't see a ton of those come through, but every year I'd say we do see a couple, and it's definitely still a way to file the FAFSA if you would prefer to do it that way over using the federal website. There used to be an app that the federal studentaid.gov site offered. Unfortunately, they have discontinued it as of this year. I think there are a lot of issues with it as well. And that's one other thing I will say is if you are thinking about doing the FAFSA soon, the start of October can be a rough month for the online form. I have seen a couple times, I mean, even earlier today, FAFSA was trending on Twitter because the site was down. So definitely just keep in mind that the site can have some issues. Thankfully, it saves you progress as you go through. But definitely, you know, if you want to be considered for federal financial aid, fill out this FAFSA form as soon as possible. From here, fafsa.gov, you'll just want to go to start here, and then you can go through and fill out the FAFSA as well. Again, like I mentioned, paper FAFSAs are still available. We recommend going through the site if available, just because it's an easier way to do it, and it helps break down some of the questions more as well, in a more understandable way as you're going through too. One thing though that I do always recommend for folks if they want to is it can be helpful to print out a paper FAFSA and kind of have it with you while you're doing the online form. I feel like the paper FAFSA is helpful because you can see everything kind of broken out, whereas with the online form, you're doing it one screen at a time, right? So, you know, if you want to be super, super specific and super focused while you're doing it, make sure you can print this out and kind of have it with you as well. But again, not a necessity as you're going through and doing the FAFSA. So like I mentioned, this is available now. You can go through and do it as soon as you're able to. I always recommend folks do it as soon as possible, just so that they can get all of the federal financial aid that's available to them and can know, you know, what they're going to be eligible for as soon as possible. One thing to keep in mind is that the FAFSA for this coming school year, so the FAFSA for the 23-24 school year, is going to be using 2021 income tax information, right? And again, so you're reporting tax information from the 2021 tax year, and then student and parent marital status and asset information on the FAFSA is going to be coming from as of the day that you are completing the FAFSA form, right? So just an important distinction to know as you're going through. And the FAFSA has things that makes it clear when they want information from, but just an important distinction to keep in mind as well. So when you're going through and doing the FAFSA, you will create what's called an FSA ID. And so who's going to need an FSA ID is going to be you, right? So the student who's going through and completing the FAFSA. And then if you are a dependent student, so you have a parent who will be signing the FAFSA as well, your one parent will need to make an FSA ID, right? So if you're doing it and putting parent information in, you're going to need to have your parent make an FSA ID as well to sign the FAFSA, because if they don't, your FAFSA is going to be rejected, and financial aid offices aren't going to be able to let you know what federal aid you're going to be eligible for. So as you're going through and completing the FAFSA with your parent, it'll prompt you to make an FSA ID. And then if you are going to be using parent information, it'll prompt your parent to use an FSA ID as well. And so this FSA ID is going to be what you're going to use to sign the FAFSA electronically, right? And this FSA ID is going to be used to sign into every federal website that's used for student aid. So just make sure, you know, once you make an FSA ID, you write down what it is, you write down your password somewhere. Thankfully, the password and username recovery for the FSA ID is super simple and super helpful, definitely specifically by federal website standards. It's very helpful. But again, important to keep that information close by just so you don't have to change it every time you're trying to log in, right? Your password for your FSA ID is going to expire every 18 months unless it's changed. You should, if you're doing the FAFSA each year, sign into your FSA ID before that 18 months. So that shouldn't be a problem for y'all as you're going through as well. And again, like I was mentioning, when you go through to sign the FAFSA, this is what you're going to see. And what you'll want to do is just click this, what I've circled here, create an FSA ID to get started and go through the FAFSA form and begin filling that out as well. And so I want to keep it kind of base level, at least in regards to the FAFSA, not go too far in depth here because there's a couple other things I want to chat about. But when we think about what's on the FAFSA, so what you're going to be putting are the colleges that you're applying to, right? Your data, parent information and data if you are a dependent student, and then income, assets, your number in household, number of children in college, right? So students, if you have siblings who are currently in college and are going to be in college for the 23-24 year, that's definitely something you're going to want to put on the FAFSA as well. And then for students and parents, I know sometimes folks can get kind of confused on what the FAFSA considers an asset versus what it doesn't consider an asset. And so on the FAFSA, when it's asking for assets, it's considering savings, checking, investments, any property or trust funds. And then what's not an asset is going to be primary homes, right? So the home that you live in, retirement, life insurance, family business as well, right? So all important things to keep in mind as you're going through and completing the FAFSA. And just make sure, you know, there will be a recording of this. And if you're going through with a parent or by yourself and don't remember what you're supposed to include, feel free to reference this and it can be kind of a resource for you there to know what needs to go on and what doesn't. So kind of talking about what happens after you complete the FAFSA, right? So your FAFSA information is going to get sent to the colleges that you put on that FAFSA, and then you are going to receive what's called a student aid report. And so this is, or what's called a STAR, right? And so this is kind of a breakdown of all the info that you put on the FAFSA. It's kind of a simplified version of what financial aid officers see. And then what's going to happen is your FAFSA is going to link with college records by your social security number, right? So just make sure, you know, if you're completing your FAFSA and you're working with colleges, working with Pacific, just make sure we have documentation of your social and you're putting that on your application as well. Just because I know it can be frustrating for folks when they've done a FAFSA and then we don't have it because we don't have a social security number in the system for folks. Next, this middle thing here is so students reach out to financial aid offices with any special circumstances. So one thing I always like to highlight and emphasize when talking about the FAFSA is, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later as well, as the FAFSA isn't always the best picture of people's actual financial circumstances, right? And so if that's the case, financial aid offices always want to hear, right? Us at Pacific always want to hear. So if there's been a change in your situation, a change in your family's financial situation, whether that be you've had a parent who's had a change in jobs, or there's been layoffs or a medical expenses come up, we want to hear about that, right? So just make sure if there's anything that's coming to mind right now, you communicate that, right? Let the financial aid office know, let your admissions counselors know, so that they can get that info to us. We want to know if what we have is not an accurate picture of your current situation. Next, some colleges might request additional information or documentation from you. So when you do the FAFSA, the federal government selects some FAFSAs for what's called verification, right? And this is a scary word, but it's, you know, can be a pretty simple process, and it just means that those financial aid departments are required to collect some additional information from you. And it'll be super clear what they need from you, and you can work with us and work with financial aid offices to get all of that set and in order so you can get your financial aid package all good to go. Next, schools will use your FAFSA to determine eligibility for, again, federal, state, institutional financial aid. And then finally, you'll get a financial aid package sent to you from schools so you can see what the picture looks like and begin working with us, right? Working with financial aid counselors and financial aid officers for steps in the future and to get everything set financial aid wise for you to be ready to come in the fall. So talking a little bit about how financial aid decisions are made in financial aid offices, right? So when we talk about financial aid eligibility for need-based aid, every school is going to use this standardized formula, right? Where we take what's called our cost of attendance, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on what that cost of attendance is made up of, subtract this expected family contribution, which is a number that's calculated by the FAFSA and using that FAFSA information, and we use this formula to determine financial aid eligibility at schools, right? So a standardized formula that's coming in mind, again, not something you need to write down or keep in mind, but I think it's just helpful for folks to know what we use at Pacific to determine financial aid eligibility for need-based aid using the FAFSA. So cost of attendance, right? So cost of attendance is a little different from things like tuition costs, as in that it includes things like tuition and fees, but then also accounts for a whole bunch of different other things that both show up on the bill and then things that also might not show up on the bill, right? So for example, at Pacific, our cost of attendance for this past year included tuition, fees, housing, room and board, right? And then also some components like transportation, an amount for books and supplies, and then a miscellaneous amount as well, right? And so again, some components of your cost of attendance are things that are going to show up on a bill. Some things like transportation, books and supplies are estimates, right? And things that are made up of your cost of attendance for you to get an idea of what those things might cost throughout the year, but that exist differently from things like direct costs. So again, like I was mentioning, this idea of tuition and fees, and then if you're living on campus, for example, room and board, those are going to be your billed or direct expenses. And then things like books and supplies, transportation, and personal expenses are indirect expenses, so things that aren't billed, but that are made up of a student's cost of attendance, right? And that's really to benefit you all, right? Understanding that there are things that exist outside of a direct bill from Pacific that are going to be factors in your college cost, right? For folks who have a car, right? You're going to be using that. Gas is expensive, so that's a factor that we can take into account for your cost of attendance when looking at eligibility for need-based financial aid, right? So you heard me mention this expected family contribution. And this is the number that the Department of Education spits out from your FAFSA information, and that's used to determine eligibility for need-based aid. So again, this is going to be the same. So your FAFSA is going to get this ESC. This is going to be the same at every school. So every school is going to receive the same ESC, but different schools use, different calculations and analysis in how they use that ESC to determine eligibility for aid, right? And again, in this ESC, there are two components. So coming from the parent info on the FAFSA, and then as well as the student info on the FAFSA as well. And as someone who's worked in financial aid for a bit, I have a lot of thoughts on the ESC and how it's calculated and what that means for families, and find, that unless it's zero, it's pretty much never an accurate representation of what a family can actually contribute, right? So knowing that there are, again, financial aid offices that are there to work with you and work for additional resources and looking for ways to help meet costs and help make college affordable, right? And again, this is a lovely graphic I've got here for ESC. So again, the realization that ESC can be a little bit jarring, I think, when folks get it. And I think it's really important to remember that there's a lot of different factors that ESC is taking from, and there's a lot of different things that ESC isn't looking at. And I want to talk a little bit more about those in the next couple of slides, but it looks like we have a question that's come through. And it says, will you please talk a bit about a process if there's more than a lot of number of schools on the FAFSA that you're applying to? Yes, great question. So I believe it's 10 is the maximum number of schools that you can put on a FAFSA. So for example, if you're going to be applying to more than that, what you can do is submit a FAFSA with those 10 schools, the first time through, right? So it's going to do a FAFSA, have it sent to those 10 schools. And then what you can do after you've submitted a FAFSA is you can submit what's called a correction, where you go into your FAFSA application and you can change around different information. You can change more things than just the schools, but for example, for this situation, if you had different schools you were wanting to apply to, you could swap those out on there and then submit the correction, and then that FAFSA would get sent to those schools as well, right? So again, it gets a little tedious to extend beyond that maximum amount of schools, but there are ways to do that where you can get it to go to different schools, but you'll just want to be submitting corrections through to different schools once you add on any sort of additional institution that you're going to be applying to as well. So again, when we talk about EFC, taking into account student and parent income, again, those assets for students and parents that I mentioned, number of families, so household size, number of children in colleges, right? So again, if you've got siblings that are in school, definitely put that on the FAFSA because that can contribute and affect EFC. But some things that the EFC doesn't take into account, right, is families' monthly financial commitments and expenses, things like mortgage, living expenses, any debt that folks might have. So, you know, just realizing that there are things that the EFC doesn't catch, right? But that there are people and folks in offices that you can communicate with, right? And that you can let know certain financial situations and circumstances that your family's in, because they really want to hear that. And we really want to hear from y'all here at Pacific if there's stuff that we can do to help take additional circumstances and things into account as well. So financial aid packages. I want to talk a little bit about this just because I think it can be helpful to kind of get an idea of what they might look like once you actually start receiving them. Just because I know, you know, I think at Pacific we do a really good job at making our financial aid awards very consumer friendly, right, and very readable. I know that that is not the case at every school. So I really want to give y'all just a little bit of a preface for financial aid awards and financial aid packages, right? So once you get a financial aid package, it's going to be sent from institutions to you. And so this is either going to come in the mail or you'll get an electronic notice. So at Pacific, what we do is we like to do both, right? So for our incoming students, we'll send you a fancy, nice red big envelope with a cool brochure and your financial aid package and a bunch of different information. And then we also send a push to your Pacific email letting you know, hey, this is viewable right now in your online portal, but you've got something on the mail that you can see that's paper that will help kind of break it down for you a little bit more as well. And so when you get these financial aid award packages, it's going to look a little different depending upon institution and school, but at Pacific, what we'll show you is the cost of attendance for the 23-24 year. It'll be a breakdown of every single scholarship, loan, grant, work study, everything that's part of your financial aid package. Any additional scholarships you've gotten at Pacific will be on there as well. And then there'll be some additional steps as well on your financial aid package that you'll have to take to finalize things like loans, scholarships, for example. So just know that once you receive your financial aid package, that doesn't mean it's the end of the process, right? It in many ways is kind of the beginning of the process for finalizing everything for financial aid at Pacific. So there'll be additional steps that you'll want to go through, and you'll work with our office to complete those as well, and do it through an online portal. So it's really, you know, user friendly and helpful to have it in that system online there, but that you'll go through with folks, and you'll have resources here to kind of walk throughout the entire process and see what that looks like moving forward. Looks like we got another question. Are there student jobs at Pacific University that aren't connected to work study? So yes, there are a ton of specific non-work study jobs at Pacific University, right? So, and I was just looking the other day, helping one of my students who's not eligible for federal work study apply, and there is still a ton of stuff open, right? So at Pacific University, we have a student job portal, and on the student job portal, every single position has either FWS or NWS in front of it, right? And so FWS positions, federal work study eligible, NWS non-work study. So if folks aren't eligible for federal work study, there are a ton of employment opportunities in departments at Pacific that can pull from their own budgets to pay students at Pacific. And if folks are going to work during school and at Pacific, I always recommend getting a job on campus, right? They're super, super flexible in regards to your class schedule. They know that, some of you are athletes, you have other stuff going on, you want to have fun too, right? So they're really good about building schedules and being flexible with students in regards to how much they work per week, right? Talking about some news. So you all have probably heard recently about the Biden administration student loan forgiveness program, right? And so while this student loan forgiveness is targeted towards loans that you all will not have, right? So the forgiveness is for loans dispersed before July 1st, 2022. There are a ton of things that are part of this student loan forgiveness package that are super awesome and super beneficial for future borrowers, right? So they've made a ton of changes to the way in interest accrues on federal student loans for folks who are on things like income repayment plans. They've changed the amount of income that the income repayment plan kind of pulls from discretionary income. So just know, if you're curious and wanting to look through, I definitely recommend you check out all the information that's on studentaid.gov regarding student loan forgiveness plan, with the knowledge that there's a ton of stuff in there that benefits students and parent borrowers moving forward from here, right? So it's awesome stuff for folks who have federal loans, but then also folks who don't yet aren't missing out, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be awesome moving forward from there too for folks as well. So if you're curious, check it out. Interesting stuff to keep in mind and to know moving forward. Talking about some additional resources. Again, this is going to be posted online, and Maddie and Tanya, if there's not a way for folks to get copies of the PowerPoint, let me know and I can send you to all of these links, and you can distribute it to folks who are here, to folks who are curious. But these are the outside scholarship resources and search engines that we have had the most students have success with at Pacific. So these resources, again, are all free. That is something I really like to highlight for folks. If you are going to be looking for outside scholarships, please never, ever, ever, ever pay for an outside scholarship search engine. There's a ton of stuff out there that's free that you don't have to pay for, right? So these are really kind of the big ones and the ones that we have students have a ton of success with. There's literally thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of scholarship opportunities on these websites. So please, please, please take advantage of them. We're kind of entering and approaching what technically you could call as the scholarship busy season. So most scholarship applications are opening their deadlines anywhere between September and December. And then most of their end dates are going to be kind of in the spring, right? So just know that if you haven't started looking, you're not late in any way. We're kind of really entering the time when it's ramping up for these outside scholarships. So definitely please look, right? It's an awesome resource to build your financial aid package and kind of go from there as well. So steps you can take now, right? So you can create an FSA ID for both yourself, your parent can create an FSA ID. You can go through and start completing and working on the FAFSA if you haven't done so. You can also, if you don't want to do the FAFSA yet, what you can do is you can go to this link here and you can actually get an estimate expected family contribution by entering information in this site here again at the estimator on the studentaid.gov site. Again, not a substitute for actually doing your FAFSA and getting a concrete EFC, but if you're just looking for a general estimate, an awesome resource as well. If you're looking at college websites, some have net price calculators that you can use to kind of input information and get an idea of what the net price might be at that institution, right? So just resources to take advantage of and things to look into as well. Something I recommend, again, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is making a spreadsheet of admissions and financial aid deadlines and applications that you're interested in doing, right? And really, really, really begin having those conversations with your families, amongst each other, about paying for college, right? And what your expectations are and strategies to kind of move forward, and just make sure you're really taking advantage of every resource and opportunity that's out there. Because again, like I mentioned, you're going for 4 years, so really important to keep that in mind, right? It's not a 1-year deal. You're going in to get your degree for 4 years, and then leave and move on to conquer the world, right? So really, I think that is all I've got for y'all. I know it was a lot of info. I might have gone over my time. I am sorry, Tanya and Maddie, but wanted to make sure I got to everything I was wanting to chat about. So I think what we'll do now is open it up to questions.
That
And
is
I can,
amazing.
go ahead, Maddie.
That's amazing, Griffin. We appreciate your time tonight. It looks like we've got one final question coming into the chat, and then there were a few submitted ahead of time. So the question coming into the chat is, so we have to do the FAFSA every year of college.
Yes, so every year you would like to be considered eligible for federal student aid, you will need to complete that FAFSA. Again, the first year is always the roughest and always is going to require you to enter the most information. After you do it the first year, every October 1st when the FAFSA opens, you can do what's called a renewal FAFSA. And what that does is it kind of acts as a placeholder where it'll pull in a bunch of information from past years so that you don't have to re-enter, things like, what your name is and what your address is. So it's kind of helpful in the sense that it lets you go through, and the only thing really you'll be changing year to year will be tax info and then asset and household info if that changes.
Yeah, it kind of auto fills
Yeah.
from year prior. Yeah. Great question. All right. So one question that was submitted ahead of time is, what if I am accepted to a college, but their aid package is still not enough for me to attend? Can I request or negotiate for more?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, again, that's the kind of situation where you would want to reach out to someone in my position, right? Reach out to your financial aid counselor. If you're more comfortable, right, and have built a relationship with your admissions counselors, reach out to them, and they always will know who the right person to connect you with is, right? So, for example, throughout the year, I work with Maddie and Tanya all the time who have students who say, hey, like, this financial aid package is awesome, but it might not work. And so what I do is work with them, work with that family, student and their situation to see if there's anything else we can offer, any other scholarships that might be available, or resources to tap into that aren't being taken advantage of. So again, like I was mentioning earlier, financial components is a big factor. My thing is making sure it's never the barrier, right? So just make sure you're reaching out to folks who work in financial aid and your admissions officers, and they'll get you in the right direction and help you out with anything they can.
I think that's great advice, Griffin. And if a student ends up really just feeling like a college is the place they want to be, and it just comes down to the cost, admissions offices want to know that. I want to know that as an admissions counselor, because yes, then I can connect you with Griffin, and then we can have more of a conversation about what does the package cover and what's the value that you're getting of the education. So we want to know if there's any hiccups in that world. All right, so another question that has come in is, what is the priority deadline to apply for financial aid, and when am I notified about financial aid award decisions?
Yeah, so for Pacific University, my recommendation for folks is so, and I guess it'll make more sense if I answer the second part of that question first, right? So at Pacific University, we send out financial aid packages to admitted students who have submitted a FAFSA starting the middle of February. And so if you want to be really a part of that first push, right, that first batch that goes out, I always recommend folks have their FAFSA done by at least the middle to end of January.
And what tax-related documents do I need to ask my parents or guardians for regarding financial aid?
Yeah, so the FAFSA is going to mainly be wanting to look at stuff just from a 2021 1040 form. So 2021 tax return transcript has, and this is all probably going to sound like a bunch of jargon. So if folks are writing it down and want me to repeat it, I can definitely do that, or I can throw it in chat. So 1040 form, which is kind of the bulk of a tax form, any schedules that your parents might have, any W-2 forms, so forms that list wages if they work for an employer and aren't self-employed, and then any sort of retirement disbursement forms as well if they have that. But those are really the big ones and the main ones that folks are going to be pulling from. And if one thing that's really nice about doing the FAFSA on the web is there are different questions that ask for different tax info. Every question on that FAFSA on the web has a little question mark that'll be next to the question. If you click on that, it'll tell you what line and form it's asking for that information from. So that's always a good resource to use, and just know that there's that little question mark there if you're like, I can't find where this, tiny little figure exists on this huge tax form. And if you click on that, it should let you know like exactly the form and line that it's wanting to pull from.
Yeah, and FAFSA automatically saves. So is that true, Griffin? And so you could jump out because you got a question and email you or connect with a parent or guardian and then go back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
100%.
So one question related to scholarships is how do I know when I've received money for a scholarship, and how do I get it to you so that it shows up, on a financial aid package?
Yeah, so for outside scholarships, so in regards to the first part, when you'll know, so ideally, if you've been awarded one, the organization that the scholarship is through will reach out to you and let you know. And so when you find out from them, what you can do is there's a couple things you can do. So at this point, early on, if you haven't gotten access to your Pacific email to get into what we call Boxer Online, which is our online portal, you can email financial aid counselors, you can email me and let me know what you're expecting. Once you get access to the online system for financial aid, you'll be able to self-report any scholarships that you're getting in that system. So what you can do is go into that system, you'll enter, this is the scholarship name, this is the amount that I'm getting it in, and then that'll show up on our end, and we add that to your financial aid package as an outside award, and then send you an updated financial aid package with that on there so you can see it in relation to the bigger picture, right?
And typically that is available once a student has applied and been accepted. So you can look forward to more resources as you apply, right? Applying just opens the door to these resources and opportunities. Yes, okay, a question has come into the chat. This is unrelated to financial aid, but I wanted to know if Pacific University requires an admissions interview. And I can take that, Griffin, if you'd like. So yeah, Pacific's admissions office, we do not require interviews to get you accepted or get you scholarship in the form of a merit scholarship at Pacific. Now, there are some ways that you could, be interviewed by our office or other people on campus to get you a scholarship. And that's going to be related to some of those talent-based scholarships that Griffin talked about, as well as some of our scholarship competitions that we have that do require an interview. But to be accepted to the university, we do not require an admissions interview. If you want to chat with us, typically what that looks like is just getting to know you, talking about programs and really geeking out with you about opportunities here. I think that's it on our questions that have been coming in.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
thank you everyone tonight. Griffin, thank you for joining us.
Of course, I'm gonna actually put my email in chat, and I think this disappears once the call is off. So, if you want to chat financial aid, copy paste, save it somewhere. And again, like, seriously, my job is financial aid. My world is financial aid. I'm a resource. I'm here for you. If it's Pacific related, if it's FAFSA related, if it's not Pacific related, please reach out. I'm happy to help with literally anything. And if I don't know the answer, I probably know someone who does, hopefully. So, just know that there are people out there to help. Financially, it can be scary, it can be overwhelming. but it doesn't have to be. So
Yeah, and it's a process. We'll take it a step at a time. So when there's those hiccups that you might reach, or those speed bumps that you might have on your way to understanding paying for college, that's what we're here for. Griffin, would you mind spelling out your email just for anyone who's watching on the record?
Yeah, and actually here, I'm gonna put, okay, so for folks who are watching the recording, my email is shau1438@pacificu.edu. That's the shortened version. I really regret making my email my full name because it can be a lot to spell out. So.
Thank you, Griffin. We appreciate it. You have really just put a lovely bow on the end of this college workshop series. So we appreciate your time tonight, Griffin. Students, thank you so much for jumping in, whether you're here live or listening to the recording. Please feel as though you can reach out to admissions@pacificu.edu if you don't know where to start with your questions that you might have. But know that we're here to support you, and we want to bring that excitement back into your college search, right? This is an incredible future opportunity. So thank you for your time.